I want to make something clear going into this. My view before I began to seriously research this topic is that monopolistic practices are becoming more and more extreme and that they are harming the greater good in America. But as I have said before, if you believe something to be true, you should try to disprove it. If you can't disprove it, you solidify that as a belief that is backed by research. Also, in doing this research, I found a lot more sources in favor of regulating monopolies more aggressively than I found arguments against this idea. That made it hard to find counter-arguments, and many of the ones that argued against this notion I found to be from very unreliable sources. And some fact checks of their points made it easy to eliminate them from inclusion in this video. I also found many sources that it took an extreme left-leaning and inaccurate viewpoint. I eliminated them from this video as well. Polling on this issue shows that the majority of Americans favor stronger enforcement of antitrust regulation. If you watch my previous video on how to find unbiased media sources, you know that AP is a very accurate source. In this poll, 81% of users say they are concerned about consolidation in big tech, which we will later see is one of the sectors with the highest concentration. This debate from Intelligence Squared Debates had two experts on each side make the case for or against breaking up big tech, and the for motion ended up winning the debate. So public support for stronger antitrust regulation is there. This article from 538, which MBFC rates as an accurate source, shows that gross revenues as a percentage of nominal GDP have been increasing steadily for both the Fortune 100 and 500. This normalization is always important to account for inflation over time. This article from IBIS World talks about the most concentrated industries. You can clearly see the domination in some of the industries, especially in big tech. This blog post from the Conversable Economist shows the prevalence of mergers and acquisitions wave since 1900. This doesn't outright prove that monopoly is a problem theory, but it is an interesting chart to say the least and adds to the discussion. Similarly, the chart of the 5 largest market cap companies as a share of the S&P 500 total is the highest on record. Again, this doesn't outright prove that monopolies are an issue because market cap is not necessarily the best measure of the size of a company, as oftentimes companies are severely overvalued in terms of market cap to earnings. Tesla is a classic example in recent years with a market cap larger than several major car companies combined, with revenues being much smaller than them. The market sometimes overpays for hype or long-term potential. That being said, I still think this does add some to the argument of an increase in monopolistic tendencies in America. This chart is of a similar vein to the previous, and again it adds to the discussion, but it is not definitive proof. Now, as I said earlier, I searched high and low for good arguments against the idea that the US government is failing to enforce antitrust laws. This was the best article I found. Before I talk about the points they make, both good and bad, I want to talk about this foundation's funding sources. This foundation does get a good percentage of their funding from big tech. Now, as for the good points they make, first, it does seem that there is not an across-the-board monopoly problem in every single sector. In fact, just 4% of industries are highly concentrated according to them. Now, their definition of highly concentrated to me is misleading, as they say that the top 4 firms, what is called C4, must hold 80% or more of the market share. To me, more than 50% is too much concentration. Still, I think it is fair to say that not every industry is overly concentrated, and for sure not a majority of industries. Another good argument that they make is that many of the industries that increase concentration the most came from industries that have rapid shifts due to competition from other industries. For instance, newsprint mills and radio networks are the 2 industries with the largest change in concentration from 2002 to 2017. Clearly, technology altering the landscape is why. Many radio and newspaper outlets have disappeared since then, and only the strongest survived. Finally, they make the point that industries that were highly concentrated in 2002 did have a tendency to decrease concentration in 2017. These are good points, but at the same time, I think this foundation tried to make several arguments in this article that contradict their argument. First, as I already alluded to, they call just 4% of industries highly concentrated, but the threshold they use of 80% C4 concentration I feel is a very high threshold. To me, 50% is a more appropriate threshold. If you use that threshold, you then would have 198 out of 643 industries being overconcentrated, or 31%. That is way too high, in my opinion. In the second bullet point in this article, they make the claim that 55% of industries increased concentration from 2002 to 2017. This doesn't really make a good argument for a decrease in monopolistic practices. So that is the ITIF article, and it is the best counter argument I could find, but to me it did not do enough to drastically alter my personal opinion on this matter. Now, it did give me some new perspective on the points I think it did get right. It successfully refined my view, but did not move it to the other side. There's a good rebuttal to the ITIF article that I found time as well. Now, it is not a direct rebuttal, but it does use much of the same data points and references a paper from the University of Hamburg. This source itself is a strong left-leaning source, but according to MBFC, it does have a history of accurate reporting. Again, I care much more about accuracy than bias. As long as the source is accurate, I will use it. And bias does not automatically mean wrong, as I think in this case the left view is the correct view. Sometimes the left view is correct, sometimes the right view is correct. This source is the monthly review. This chart from this post shows the number and percentage of U.S. manufacturing industries in which the largest 4 companies, again C4, accounted for at least 50% of the shipment value in their industry since 1947. This shows a pretty decent increase in concentration in terms of percentage. Now, U.S. manufacturing has largely been outsourced, so that is clearly one factor, but it does show an increase in monopolistic practices from 1947 from 30% to 40%. This next chart shows the percentage of total businesses from the top 200 corporations since 1950. This is similar to the 538 charts posted earlier. It is also normalized, but it is longer term. Since 1950, the top 200 corporations' share of the total business revenue went from 21% to 30% in 2008, a clear concerning trend. Similarly, gross profits went from 13% to 29%. So overall, my view remains similar to the view I had going into this. We have a problem with companies growing too large in this country. And for me, the increasing power of corporations continues to make us look much more like an oligarchy or a plutocracy instead of a democracy. To me, the biggest problem with why our democracy is in decline relates to the increasing power and influence these mega corporations have on our society. The rapid increase in the amount of money spent lobbying the government to prevent them from regulating this power increase is a major concern. I have several more in-depth videos planned where I do more deep dives on corporate greed. If you enjoyed this video and want to support me, pressing the subscribe and like button is a free and quick way to do that. Comments help a lot too. And if you agree or disagree, I'd love to hear from you and your viewpoint. Appreciate you all, and see you in the next video.